300 BC, no empire, no palaces, the origins of Petra. Imagine a desert with no mercy, a place where the sun doesn't just shine, it burns, where the wind doesn't just blow, it erases, where water is not a comfort, but a secret that once found is worth more than gold. Now imagine that somewhere inside this desert, hidden between walls of rose-red sandstone, invisible from the outside world, reachable only through a narrow crack in the rock, a group of nomads decided to stop. They didn't build a palace. They didn't raise an army. They didn't carve a single stone. Not yet. This is the story of what came before all of that. The story of 300 BC. The story of the beginning, Mum. And it is a story that the desert almost swallowed entirely, because the people at the center of it left almost nothing behind. No written chronicles, no founding myths carved into temple walls, no royal proclamations announcing their arrival. Just silence, stone, and the faint traces of a civilization that was, even then, learning to become something the world had never seen. Who were these people? That question has puzzled historians, archaeologists, and linguists for centuries. And the honest answer is, we still don't know for certain. What we do know is this: the Nabataeans were an Arab tribe, most likely from the deserts of northern Arabia. Their names were Arab names. Their language was an early form of Arabic, written in an Aramaic script. Their gods were desert gods. And their home was the open, endless expanse of the ancient Near East. Long before Petra was ever built, the Nabataeans were moving, constantly moving. With their camels, their goats, their sheep, and their tents, they roamed across what is today Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the Sinai. They followed water, they followed grass, they followed survival. And for a long time, no empire paid much attention to them. That indifference was, in a way, their greatest advantage. While the great powers of the age, the Persians, the Greeks, the Egyptians, fought over coastlines and river valleys and fertile plains, the Nabataeans mastered a different kind of territory. They mastered the void, the empty quarter, the space between empires that no general wanted and no farmer could use. They learned the desert the way a sailor learns the sea, not by conquering it, but by reading it. Every hidden spring, every seasonal wadi that flooded in winter and ran dry by summer, every pass through the sandstone mountains that a laden camel could navigate without breaking a leg. This knowledge was not written down. It lived in memory, passed from father to son, from elder to youth, whispered around fires at night beneath skies that were, in the desert, almost unbearably full of stars. Then, in 3 to 12 BC, that changed. The Greek general Antigonus the One-Eyed, one of the successors to Alexander the Great's fractured empire, sent his officer Athenaeus with a force of soldiers into the desert. Their mission: to attack the Nabataeans, seize their silver, their frankincense, their spices, and bring them under Greek control. It was a catastrophic failure. The Greeks stormed into the Nabataean stronghold, a high rocky place that some scholars believe may already have been Petra, though the exact site is still debated, while the fighting men were away. They looted what they found, took hostages, and retreated. But they didn't get far. The Nabataeans caught up with them in the desert at night. In the darkness, familiar to no Greek soldier, but deeply known to every Nabataean, they massacred Athenaeus and his men. The hostages were freed. The silver and incense were recovered. Antigonus sent a second army. It was repelled as well. The message to the ancient world was clear. These people could not be easily conquered. And anyone who wanted to understand why had to understand the land they came from, because the desert itself was their greatest weapon. But there was something else, something harder to explain and harder still to admire from the outside. The Nabataeans, according to those early Greek accounts, had a rule, a strict, almost sacred prohibition. They did not build houses. They did not plant vineyards. They did not settle. To do so, they believed, was to make yourself vulnerable, to give an enemy something to destroy, to give yourself something to lose. Their strength came precisely from having nothing that could be taken. No city walls to breach, no granaries to burn, no routes to tear out, just the desert, the camel, and the road. To understand why Petra would one day become one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, you have to understand one commodity: frankincense. In 300 BC, frankincense was not merely a perfume. It was the fuel of the divine. Every temple in the Mediterranean world burned it. Every religious ceremony demanded it. The Romans would one day consume so much of it that historians believe it contributed to the deforestation of entire regions of southern Arabia. And the only way to get it from its source, the dry mountains of Yemen and Oman, to the altars of Egypt, Greece, and the Levant, was across the desert. The Nabataeans controlled that road. They didn't fight for it. Not at first. They were already there. Already moving across those routes, already knowing where the water was, already navigating the desert that broke every foreign army sent into it. When the incense trade exploded in the centuries following Alexander's conquests, the Nabataeans didn't need to conquer anyone. They simply charged a fee, and they charged it to everyone. Frankincense, myrrh, spices from India, silk, perhaps, passing westward from distant Asia. All of it moved through Nabataean hands. All of it passed through the valley of Petra, or around it, or was taxed by men who called that valley home. By 300 BC, the Nabataeans were wealthy in a way that had no monument. Their wealth was invisible, hidden in desert cisterns, encoded in trade agreements, accumulated in silver that they reportedly buried underground rather than carrying in palaces or public treasuries. Ancient sources, including the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, noted with something close to astonishment that these people seemed to live without luxury, even as they accumulated it. They wore simple clothes. They held outdoor feasts rather than formal banquets. Their leaders sat on the ground with their people. No palace, no throne room, and yet, power. It is worth pausing here to grasp how unusual this was. In the ancient world, wealth announced itself. It built pyramids, it raised columns, it paved roads with stone and hung gold from temple ceilings. Wealth, in every civilization surrounding the Nabataeans, was architecture. It was permanence. It was the insistence that we were here, and we mattered. The Nabataeans inverted all of that. Their wealth moved. It walked on the feet of camels across 500 kilometers of desert. It changed hands in the dark, at watering holes that only they could find. It was, in every sense, invisible to those who did not know where to look. And that invisibility was not an accident. It was a strategy. A survival strategy so effective that it would, within 2 centuries, fund one of the most spectacular building programs the ancient Near East had ever seen. Here is what keeps archaeologists awake at night. Only about 15% of Petra has been excavated. 15%. The rest, temples, tombs, streets, water systems, homes, sacred spaces, lies buried, collapsed, or still sealed inside the living rock of those red sandstone mountains. What we know about Petra in 300 BC is remarkable. What we don't know is immense. We don't know exactly when the first Nabataean hand touched chisel to stone and began to carve. We don't know what they called their first permanent structures, or whether those first residents thought of themselves as a people making history or simply a family trying to survive. A stele, a stone inscription found in Damascus and dated to the 3rd century BC, refers to a king of the Nabataeans, which tells us that by then, someone was already wielding enough authority to claim a royal title. But what that king's name was, where exactly he lived, and whether he stood in a carved chamber or a goatskin tent, that we cannot say. What we can say is this. In 300 BC, a transformation was beginning. Not a revolution with a clear date, not an empire with a founding ceremony. Just a slow, quiet, almost invisible shift. From movement to stillness, from tent to stone, from seasonal camp to something that would, over the next 2 centuries, become one of the most astonishing cities the ancient world ever produced. The Nabataeans were learning a new skill, not fighting, not trading. They already knew that. They were learning how to stay, how to belong to a place, how to make a valley, hidden at the end of a canyon that even the sun could barely penetrate, into a home. And the rock was waiting. Consider what it means to carve a city from stone. Not to stack stones, the way every other civilization built, but to remove stone, to hollow out the mountain from the inside, to work not with addition, but with subtraction, shaping rooms and facades and staircases by taking away, grain by grain and chip by chip, what the mountain had accumulated over millions of years. The first Nabataean carvings were modest. Small niches cut into cliff faces to hold sacred objects, simple rectangular shapes that archaeologists call beetles, representations of the divine that required no human form, only presence. Then came the simple tomb chambers, cut horizontally into the softer bands of sandstone, sealed with stone doors, marked with nothing more than a name. The ambition was quiet at first, functional. The mountain was a tool, not yet a canvas. But somewhere in that slow process, something shifted. Someone looked at a cliff face and saw not just a wall to hollow out, but a surface to transform. And the question of when exactly that moment happened, when utility became art, when shelter became monument, is one that archaeologists are still trying to answer. Stand in the Sick today, that long winding slot canyon that leads to Petra, and something strange happens. The noise of the world disappears. The canyon walls close in. The light changes color, from white to gold to deep amber. And then at the far end, through a gap barely wide enough for a camel and its rider, you catch your first glimpse of the treasury. That famous facade carved into the cliff face, more than 40 meters high. Impossible and perfect. But in 300 BC, there was no treasury. There was no colonnaded street. There were no royal tombs, no monumental temples, no carved gods staring down from rose-red walls. There was only the canyon, the sound of water, the smell of incense on a passing caravan, the footprints of people who did not yet know what they were building. What drove them to carve into stone, when stone is the hardest material a human hand can shape without machine? What made them look at a cliff face and imagine a room inside it, or a facade or a tomb worthy of a king? What kind of patience, what kind of vision, what kind of faith in the future does it take to begin cutting a city from a mountain, knowing that you will not live to see it finished? These are the questions that Petra asks of every person who walks through its canyon, and so far, the rock has not answered. History loves the monument. It loves the treasury, the great facades, the royal tombs that rise like frozen waves from the cliff face. But the story of Petra does not begin with any of those things. It begins in 300 BC, in a valley that no outsider could easily find, around water that only a desert nomad knew how to reach, among a people who wrote almost nothing down and left their history not in texts but in stone. Slowly, over generations, with the patience of those who have survived the desert and know that the most important things take time. The Nabataeans had no empire in 300 BC. They had no palaces, no written laws, no grand administrative apparatus. What they had was knowledge. Knowledge of water, of roots, of the stars that guided them across the darkness of the desert at night. Knowledge of how to survive where others could not. And that knowledge, invisible, unmeasurable, impossible to conquer, was the foundation on which everything else would be built. The stone came later. The carving came later. The wonder came later. But the wonder began here, in the silence of a desert that no one thought was hiding anything, in a valley that looked, from the outside, like nothing at all.